You know, I saw your list of speakers for the year, and I just want to say that I'm honored to be on the list with names of such caliber like Jim Doyle and Hal Mahoney and all the other people out there that I looked up to as a young man. For most people that don't know who I am, I'm a second-generation bonsai artist. There's not too many second-generation bonsai artists in the United States. My father, who's in the audience, who's right there, started working on bonsai back in the 60s. He worked with Yuji Yoshimura, Frank Okamura at the Bronx Botanical Gardens. And as a kid, I was exposed to bonsai. I was around it my whole life. So I got an eye for it as a young man. I've been keeping trees as bonsai for many, many years. Some trees I've had in my possession for over 25 years. I even have a Japanese maple that I've had since I'm 12 years old. I still have it. And it's a bonsai. So, and now I currently learn under the tutelage of a few masters. I don't have just one master any longer. I had one master for many years, but he retired. And after that happened, I became a teacher. I started doing demonstrations, and now every year I learn under the tutelage of a few different masters. One of them is Sutin Suko Soul Visit, who I'm sure most of you know. Marco Invernisi, who's a student of Kimura, who is one of the most elite bonsai artists in the world. So I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different bonsai artists, and hopefully it'll help me get to the point where maybe I'll be like them one day, I don't know. But today I'm going to work on Literati bonsai. A lot of people don't understand what Literati is, just like Seal said when she came up to here before. It's an art form that in the past was frowned upon. When scholars back during the Tang Dynasty were making calligraphy drawings of trees that they were copying from Penjing or from mountain scenes, they were these tall, skinny trees with not much to them. And as bonsai artists, they frowned upon them as going outside of the boundaries of bonsai. So, you know, a typical Literati would be something like this. And they use the concept of less is more, and it's always in a round pot. Now, what they mean by less is more is calligraphy is just a few strokes. I mean, I don't know much of it, but it's just literally stuff like that. Just a few strokes, and this Literati, or Bunjin, they also called it, was copying this calligraphy of just a few strokes, and they were making very simplistic bonsai. Now, the first people that made bonsai, which they called Literati, again, were frowned upon as if they were minimalists and they weren't staying within the boundaries of bonsai. But as time went on, people started to understand what Literati was, and they kind of got it. Now, when you see a tree in nature, for example, clinging to life on a cliff, it's not this lush bush growing like you see like people have in front of their houses. You know, say here's a cliff in nature. It's a little tree that could be just like that. And it could be just a few branches, and it could be literally living in its own needle litter its whole life for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's what we're depicting here with Literati bonsai. We're not depicting a lush growing bush in a pot. We're depicting a tree clinging to life. It's hanging on by a thread. One bad snowstorm or one bad storm will knock it off the mountain and it's dead. But it's clinging to life, and it's been there for many years. Now, also in Literati, the Nabari, it does not matter. As we look at Nabari constantly in regular bonsai, for example, informal upright, formal upright, everybody's always concentrating on the Nabari. Okay, they all want to see the nice roots flaring out from the base. You know, they all want to see this. But in Literati, they don't even look at that. That has nothing. It could be a pin straight trunk right into the pot. And what I've done here is I've taken a Kishu Shinpaku. Does everybody know what Kishu Shinpaku is? The difference between Kishu and regular? A Kishu Shinpaku is a little darker, greener, and it's got much tighter growth. Now this long growth here is because I fertilize them a lot and I try to get them to grow a lot. But in a bonsai pot, this tight growth here will stay like this for years and years and years. Did you get that on the camera? All right. And that's what makes these such a great bonsai specimen. And as you can see, this does not have a very thick trunk, and this tree is pretty old. This tree is probably about 15 years old, maybe older. That's why in Japan, when you see a Shimpaku juniper with a trunk like that, that tree is hundreds of years old. Hundreds. So they're slow growing, and they have very tight growth, and there's a reason why you see a lot of these in pictures in Japan, because this tight growth lends itself very well to bonsai. And this particular variety, Kishu, is even smaller than regular Shimpaku juniper. So what I've done is I usually buy these when they're about this thick, about as thick as this, and I'll wrap a wire around them and twist them when they're younger and just let them grow. And then eventually you get this nice twisted trunk. And again, in Literati, they really like twisted trunks. One of the other concepts of Literati is that they think that some of these trees that they're depicting look the way they do because in Japan and in China, they were foraging for firewood and they pulled all the limbs off the bottom of the trees. So the only thing left were the tops. Another theory is that they were cutting down the trees for wood and they cut all the straight ones down to build with, and they left all the small crooked ones. And the crooked ones had no lower branches because they were surrounded by other trees. So they were trying to reach for the light above them. And then when the other trees were gone, then you had these minimalistic small trees with very little growth on them, but that's what they look like. So that's another theory behind what Literati is and why they use them. So, but today, they're quite common, and it's kind of an easy way out. If you've got a really thin trunk tree that doesn't have much to it, you can wire it and get some movement out of it and make a nice Literati out of it. So let me get started on this. The first thing I'm going to do is take out a lot of the lower branches. Now Seal's going to have a heart attack, but she'll be all right. Now there's going to be a lot of cutting material left over on these. Maybe you guys would want to raffle those off too, because you can use them as cuttings to root.
They root pretty well?
They root pretty well, yeah, they do. What I usually do is I'll take, I'll take a small piece like this. And I'll cut the top off. And I put those in 50% perlite, 50% peat moss in small little pots, one per pot. I put them in my greenhouse, or if you don't have a greenhouse, put them on the ground in the shade where they get morning sun and water them every day. The perlite and the peat moss drains very easily, so they don't stay too wet, and they root within a couple of weeks. Now's a good time to do it. All right, we don't need this, though. This is coming off.
What's the difference between the Kishu and the
Itagawa? There's not much of a difference. As a matter of fact, I think they may be one and the same. I'm not positive, because I've seen plenty of them that look very similar to Kishu. So I don't know. It could be the same tree. No, I'm gonna gin that. You want to do this when the branch is alive, because you can't peel that bark off when the branch is dried out, and you won't get that nice look. We'll probably wire that later too. But in Japan, they love junipers, especially the Kishu and the Itoigawa. As a matter of fact, it's illegal to go dig one up from the mountains now. They're protected species because they're almost gone. They took all the good ones. So you know how like here in the United States, the only way to get a really good thick trunk bonsai or pre-bonsai is to dig up a landscape tree. That's what they're doing in Japan now too. They're starting to plant these in fields and just forget about them and letting them grow and grow and grow. They've been doing it for the last 30, 40 years because they knew eventually they'd run out, which they're getting to that point. Now these little gins in the bottom are just depicting over time the bottom branch is dying back from being crowded out by another tree next to it or whatever happened. Now, I didn't draw a picture yet because I really don't know what this is going to look like until I'm done, so. But I have an idea. This is a pretty cool tool here. I got this from a guy in Europe. It's a gym stripper. It works good on dry wood. If you can find one, grab it. Now I also use these as material for grafting. What I've been doing the last couple of years is I've been grafting this variety of juniper onto my sergeant's junipers, because the sergeant's junipers, the growth is so heavy and thick. I don't know if anybody's noticed that. Back in 2000 and I think it was 8 or 9, Bill Valvanis had his first international expo. Does anybody know what year that was? 2008 maybe? Anyway, I went there and a guy named Jim Grimmell had a, you know what year it was? The first one? All right, doesn't matter. Jim Grimmell from California had a San Jose juniper, a cascading San Jose juniper, that he had replaced every branch with this variety Shimpaku. And it took him about, he told me about 15 years to do that. He would do a bunch every year because not everyone would take. And after about 12 years, he had enough that he thought it would, you know, complete the tree. And then he cut off all of the San Jose growth and left just Shimpaku growth. So he had a big, thick trunk cascade that was Shimpaku. Very impressive. The minute I saw that, I was like, I have to do that. So I've been working on trying to make those. And he was right, because every year I do it, not all the grafts take, but at least a few take every year. So.
Now, if you do that, do you have to worry about the original tree coming back at all, or?
No, believe it or not, you really don't, because you know junipers do bud back, but not on old wood, not as easily and readily as like a deciduous tree like a maple or an elm. So, for example, you know, if you made all this, well, what would happen is you'd graft here, right on that spot. If this was a San Jose or a Sargent's, you'd graft here and you'd let this grow, and then when this healed, you'd cut it all off, and then you'd have nothing from here down. You would take all this off, so then all the new Shimpaku would be growing here. That's how you do it. Now, what I usually do is when I get to the point where I'm wiring, I have people take a break, but this is a small tree, so I'm not going to do that. It won't take too long to wire this.
And it's all Joe's fault that there's no. Whose fault? Yours.
That there's no what?
You forgot the projector.
Oh, come on.
I know, you know, Ben, really, just play more on this.
These guys.
40 years we do without it.
But it was more fun, come on, it's much more fun. Oh, he likes playing with these guys.
The first time Valavanis used that, like that.
Used what?
The projectors, yeah, you had two screens set up.
Oh, yeah?
Great, wasn't it, Joe?
That first year, we never saw that before.
Good, I missed the budget. He did that purpose, didn't he?
Now I'm just taking a lot of the stuff that's growing close to the trunk here, because we're creating a minimalistic tree. We don't want too much. We don't want to kill it. That's why in a pot like this, whoever gets this tree, I would suggest leaving it in this pot for at least another year or even two, and then put it in a bonsai pot. Don't play with it right away. Junipers don't like when you wire them and prune them and then transplant them. You can't do it all at the same time. And they don't like to be wet. A lot of people keep junipers way too wet. One of my first bonsai teachers told me that it would take me 10 years to learn how to water trees, and I laughed at him. I said, yeah, right. But he was right. It took me 10 years to learn how to fir bark, a third turf face, and a third pumice. And that's it. I mean, you can see it from here. It's literally gravel. And they do fine in it. And they're in full sun. I don't put them in the shade, full sun. Now, after this is wired, I would put it in the shade for at least a couple weeks and then move it to the sun. I'll miss them every day, the foliage. But as far as watering, that's why I said it takes 10 years to learn how to water, because everybody's environment is different. My backyard's different from your backyard. My amount of sunlight on these trees is different from the amount of sunlight on your trees. So planted in full sun, I would water these every other day, but I wouldn't even water them a lot. And if it's going to rain, I wouldn't water them for many days afterwards, because they'd be soaked from the rain. So when I do water them, I don't soak them. Because where they come from, they literally get mist off the mountains in the morning in the form of dew, and that's it. They may have a rainy season for a few weeks, but other than that, they're not getting a lot of water, and they like it that way. They don't like being soaking wet. I was at a nursery last week, and the guy was asking me, Vin, I don't know what to do with all these junipers. They're doing horribly. And he had them on a watering system, and they were growing in like a peat moss based mix, and they were soaking wet. So I told him, you know what, you got to get them out of there. But he didn't believe me. So.
It depends on the watering system. You can have weather in one zone. In one zone, you get very little water, and in another zone, you get more.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. If a juniper is being watered, say, every other day, and then what if it rains and it's still being watered every other day? Or what if it's cloudy and it's still being watered every other day? Then just being too wet for a few days creates a problem. So I always tell people, just stand outside and water your trees. Why do you have them if you don't want to look at them? I go out every morning and water my trees every single day. Well, depends on what tree. I gotta water. Someone's got to get watered. I got a lot of trees.
How do you tell if this is dry?
You can put your finger in there and feel if it's, or use a chopstick and put it in there.
With that forest of
Well, you put your finger in there or put a chopstick in there and see if it's moist, you know? Again, that's why it takes 10 years to learn how to water. Because now I know exactly how long these take to dry out.
And what kind of soap junipers like?
Were you not here the last 5 minutes?
I'm sorry. I want to make sure everybody heard it.
You missed that part.
I heard you talking about mystic.
I explained to everybody the soil that I use on these is a third fir bark, a third turf face or haydite, whatever you can get, and a third pumice. Pumice is this white stuff.
Like perlite?
Yeah, it's like perlite, but a little heavier. I like it. It's nice. It's great for conifers. The pumice, I got it from Jim Doyle. You could use perlite.
What about volcanic?
Remortgaging your house.
Volcanic. I love volcanic stone. It's expensive though. It is, and it's great. If you have a tree that's in need of like I don't know, like it needs to be brought back from the half dead, plant it in straight volcanic stone. You'll be amazed how nice.
Where do you buy volcanic stone?
You can get it online, yeah. It comes in red and black. Red or black. Either one, it doesn't matter.
Volcanic stone, that's the same as lava rock.
Yeah, lava rock, same thing.
No, the reason I'm saying is the stone lanterns got like the soil, which is primarily lava rock. Stone lanterns.
Yeah, that's expensive too, though. If you do it yourself, you know who sells good lava rock? Places that sell orchid mixtures for growing orchids. They also sell fir bark, most of those places too. So fir bark. They even sell the pumice in different sizes, orchid places.
Stone lanterns sometimes, just because they don't have
But you don't make it 100% pumice, right?
No, I mix.
Keep an eye on it periodically.
I mix a third fir bark, a third turface or haydite, and a third pumice.
Then you're clearing off those branches, or partially clearing them off. Will they begin to regrow in areas where they're clearing now?
Not necessarily. The reason why there's a lot of growth on the trunks here is because I fertilize these a lot to really get them to grow in the beginning. But then once I make a bonsai out of them and I wire the branches into places, if you notice, this tree's trying to go up. But once I wire this and get everything down, all of the tips are going to be, shading, certain parts. So those trunks, those stems that'll be shaded a little bit won't grow. Shinpaku really doesn't grow very well on old wood either, so unless it does this, unless it's growing, and then it gets little buds everywhere, which we're not going to let it do. We don't want it to look like it's a lush, forest or a bush.
That won't get brown on the tips, will it? Like sometimes
If you cut it like that, it will. Yeah, I usually just pull out the little pieces. If you cut them, yeah, they do too. But that is a tree that you really have to stay on top of and pluck. If you don't pluck, then it looks horrible. That's for another day. Now, I don't know if I'm going to keep this or not, but I'm going to prune it as if I am. This little branch back here, I might. We'll see. You don't like when trees get pruned, huh?
Just wonder what if happen, like somebody screaming and every time they cut a branch.
The way I look at it with pruning is like that one time you had Bob Mailer here and he took that Japanese maple and he hacked it back. The way I look at it is when I was younger, I was the same way. I was like, maybe I shouldn't prune and maybe I shouldn't prune it. Maybe I'll leave more branches. But what happens is a year or two later, you end up cutting them off anyway. So you wasted those 2 years. You could have had something growing in that spot or started, more branches growing. So the way I look at it is just do it. Just cut it all off, get it over with.
Yeah, but it takes experience to know how much you can cut up and get away with that before you kill
That's
it.
true. That's true. But you're going to kill a lot of trees. Yeah. A couple of years ago, I was working with Marco Invernizzi, and one of the other students said to him, I went to Japan and I went to Kimura's collection, and he had a lot of dead trees behind his shed. He was trying to say Kimura doesn't know what he's doing. So Marco said to the guy, bonsai is two things. It's art and it's horticulture. But there's one thing to be a horticulturist, but to be a miracle worker is another. He said everybody brings their sick and dying trees to Kimura. And he can't get them all back in shape, but he tries. But he can't find himself to throw out those old 200-year-old stumps, so he keeps them. So he's got a bonsai graveyard. So what I'm getting at is you're going to kill a lot of trees before you learn what you're doing, but when you get to the point where you're a Kimura, people are going to bring you their trees that they killed. All right, so Let's start wiring this. Well, this is a Kimura trick. He puts a little U on there, and he'll grab a branch. He'll latch onto a branch somewhere, and then start wrapping around. It's like an anchor. If you don't do that, it won't hold tight enough. Now, I always use copper wire on junipers, always, because junipers really tend to bounce back. If you used aluminum wire, they're going to get out of that shape quick. And the good thing about copper wire is it work hardens. Over time, it gets harder. It stays in place, and it hardens in time. It doesn't get softer. Aluminum wire is the opposite. It gets softer. So I always use copper wire. And I always attach one wire from one wire from one branch to another. If you notice, I got two. I'm on this branch and this branch. I go depending on where I'm going to bend that branch. Now, if you notice when I did this one, I did a little twirly to myself because I'm going to come this way with it. So I'm going that way with the wire. If I went the opposite way, I wouldn't be able to bring it. You can't bend something the opposite direction in which it would be like taking a spring and trying to unspring it. Okay, doesn't work. And wiring took a really long time for me to get. I work with a lot of bonsai students who think they know that they know how to wire, and they really don't. It took me many years to learn how to wire, probably 20 years.
But you were learning how to water at the same time, right?
I'm pretty witty and I can come back with something, but I'm going to be friendly. No, I'm going to be friendly. But yes, I was learning how to water at the same time. I was learning how to wire. One of my teachers would make me wire a tree and then take it off and wire it again.
You would have to wire it again?
Yeah, no, I did.
Because it was wrong, or because he just wanted to give
No, because it was wrong. Do it again. And I took lessons once with the Italian guy, Literati, Salvatore Literati. Does anybody know him? I went to Europe and took lessons with him, and thank God I knew how to wire, because there was a guy in that class who was a lot older than me and a lot more experienced than me, who, this guy, Salvatore Literati, ripped him a new, to the point where the guy left, and he paid a lot of money to be in the workshop. The guy left, so I guess it was trial by fire that I learned.
Literati advertised at the time that beginners were not welcome?
Yeah. Yeah. But this guy was not supposed to be a beginner, you know? But he was. It's okay. But, you know, to me it was rude, in a way, because the guy was spending money with him. But this guy, Literati, learned in Japan too. And when he learned, I guess the master he had must have been the same way. And must have been like, you know, do it right or get out. And that was it. So I learned how to wire quickly. Alright, I still don't know which one of these I'm keeping.
Well, if you didn't beforehand, you would have been doing that first.
Yeah. So take the time to wire. And another thing I learned from one of my masters was if you start wiring a tree, don't stop. Don't stop and do the rest tomorrow or next week. If you start, you finish. And I've got some trees that I've wired that took a whole day, like from morning till night. A couple of old pines. Well, but how do you know everybody's going to like it? It could come out horrible.
Is there a rule of thumb on
For the thickness?
wire?
Yeah, there is. I always use I use a wire that's a third the thickness of the branch on copper. Say again? Well, on deciduous trees, I'll use aluminum, Japanese maples. I really like aluminum on Japanese maples because it doesn't. You can use a really thick wire on a Japanese maple, and it'll bend easy, and it won't dig in time. A Japanese maple. Who was I was talking to you before about. You use a wire, and if it grows in and creates a scar, I think I was talking to Jim about it. You're done forever. I mean, trying to get that scar out of that branch, it's not going to work. But if you use a thick aluminum wire, it's harder for it to scar up on it.
So how long do you leave the wire on?
That's a good question. I leave it on till I have an idea that it's going to start growing in. And every tree is different, and every growing environment is different. So I watch it constantly. But for example, on a juniper, I've left wire on, copper wire, left on for almost a year. Deciduous trees, I'll wire them in the spring, and I'll take it off by July or August. So it's only on for a few weeks or a few months. But with the slower growing stuff like junipers, you could probably get away with almost a year, almost.
And then the next year you have to re-wire it again.
If the branch didn't stay where you wanted it, yeah, you'd have to wire it again. But junipers, what I like about junipers is they're like clay. You can mold them. They do tend to stay in one spot once you wire them. They stay there.
How old is this tree?
I think it's about 15 years old.
How about pines? How long do you wire those?
Same thing, almost one season, one growing season. About.
If you're saying at the top, you keep on pushing out and growing, so what do you do with the top to avoid that?
Oh, I'm gonna pick some. That's not gonna be the top though. By the way, that's gonna be turned and twisted. And,
One with whatever is left, and not the top.
right.
Whatever is
I'm gonna cut it off. I don't want any of the juvenile growth. And I don't like to cross wires, but sometimes you have to. I saw one artist once describe how they determined the thickness of wire once, and what they did was they took the wire and I wired everything, so, but they pressed it on there, and if the wire could bend the branch without bending, then they knew that it was a good size. But I do a third.
Now, does that third rule apply with aluminum too?
No, that's the whole thing, only copper.
again before somebody else took it.
Sorry, Tom, I like it. Got the I got nothing. I got aggravation. I'm giving it to you. $7. You might want to cut him a nine. I got
I don't do Facebook auctions and stuff like that. Yeah. How do you pay people? Yeah, I have to PayPal, but it's just you know, I don't know. I don't know if I quite trust people on Facebook. Well, it's not just him. I mean, is it him selling or is other people selling? Through that stuff. It's not just him.
He's the one.
But that doesn't mean the person you're buying from is gonna push you.
Will work for me? Yes.
It's a wash. Yeah, you just cut it out, you just get rid of it without much. All you do is get rid of the clouds, you hear it. I'm saying the whole thing in my head.
The
little pots like this, and they give everything. Anyway, you're doing the cutting, so you take the top off, why?
Yeah, I just to cease that apical bud from growing.
Okay.
You want it to send the energy down, not
Okay, gotcha,
not up.
gotcha,
Yeah.
That's like a lot of the big things. Yeah. I'm not sure if I put one up or not.
Yeah,
Yeah. They're nice heavy pots.
I go in like 3 or 4 pots. I don't know what I'll put in it.
What's nice though, we're getting a lot of that. Do you like that?
Probably, I don't know, is it growing in yet? The baldies, the cool thing about the baldies is that wire take a while to grow in, you know?
Yeah, it's not growing in.
No.
No way.
Probably like the end of the summer.
No, I look at it every day. It's not
Yeah.
growing.
No, I wouldn't worry about it.
It's all right.
Yeah. It's good.
When you bent it with the wire, when it was first a baby, the trunk, to bend the wire, to bend that foliage. You gotta watch it very carefully though, right?
No, I let the wire grow in.
You let the wire grow.
Yeah. I do. That's what gives you that funky look there. Yeah.
Over, and it just grows over.
Right.
Okay.
No, no one's paying attention.
I'm paying attention.
I know.
Because I keep on avoiding wiring.
Then we had no internet. Library, my local library was half the size of the room.
Clinging to lifestyle.
That's I have one of my cousins.